So, as promised, we are diving back into the Penguin Classics Marvel Collection X-Men. And we are starting off with, well, not starting off, but continuing with X-Men issue 3 from January 1964. I tried going through the forward on this thing, and they don't explain why they left out X-Men number 2. For me, that particular issue, I've never read it. That's one reason why I wanted it. But also, from when we went over the Cyclops Warlock Build-A-Figure wave, from what I understood is issue 2 was the first time that Scott was called Scott. Issue 1 that we talked about, he was always called Slim. So it was just kind of like, eh. But nonetheless, first appearance of Blob, the newest Lee Kirby Spectacular. Beware of the Blob. 24 pages of thrills. And now before we get into any of this, let's talk about who made this book back in the day. This is written by Stan Lee, illustrated by Jack Kirby, inked by Paul Reinman, and lettered by Art Simek. Now, help me out here. Because I've seen controversies online where everyone keeps saying, oh, Stan Lee took everyone's rights away, and he's always saying he's the forefront of all the creations and doesn't give any credit to any of his team. Now, don't get me wrong. No one's perfect. Everyone has their flaws. And I'm sure Stan Lee probably did make some bad choices back in the day. But whenever I go back and read books like this, like when we went over, I think it was ASM number 1 where he fought the Fantastic Four, you know, Stan Lee made sure to give credit where credit was due. And right here, he makes sure, and I think wasn't it Stan Lee that was the first one to actually start putting who created the books? Because if we go back and look at older Silver Age DC and early Golden Age comics, they didn't have those bylines. So it was either that or like Bob Kane, where everything was Bob Kane and they just totally wiped out Bill Finger. So again, not one person on this earth is perfect, but I always appreciated from interviews that I've seen from Stan Lee and the way that he would, you know, right here, he says, where the hell was it? Lee Kirby Super Spectacular. And even the same, like I remember I was watching an interview when they were, I think he was talking about Steve Ditko. I could be wrong. Feel free to correct me in the comments. But Stan Lee basically, I think he told Ditko like something like, if you want to say you're the creator of Spider-Man, go ahead. I don't care. Or something like that. But he always gave credit where credit was due. And people that I've seen, like for example, Comic Book Men, there was an episode where John Romita Jr. was in the shop. And he was talking about how when he was a kid, Stan Lee would come over and work with his dad, John Romita Sr. And he said that he used to get so enthusiastic because why his dad was sitting there sketching the poses. Stan Lee would be like jumping on their furniture and doing Spidey Thwip poses so that Romita could model it. And so again, nobody's perfect, but stories like that just makes me wish that I had a friend like that or like just a fellow creator in my life that had that type of enthusiasm. So I can kind of see back and forth, but nonetheless, that's just me, and that's why Stan Lee is such a household name, because, you know, he worked with some greats. Jack Kirby, obviously, the biggest one. But anyway, that's off my Stan soapbox. But I wanted to share that with you all. I want to hear your thoughts. Now let's dive into Beware of the Blob. So again, we open up on the team training. Whoop-de-doo. But what I like here is, at the beginning, we kind of talked about this with issue 1, where it feels like when they created this, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby very much had the Thing and the Human Torch on their mind. Because here, Bobby's goofing off like Johnny Storm does, and then Beast says, "Look out, you know I'm allergic to sawdust." Little man, did anyone ever tell you that a feather-brained fathead, if it weren't for the fact that I abhor violence? But you can kind of start to see that I think they finally realized that they had to kind of differentiate these guys because they're teenage heroes and not Marvel's first family. So Xavier says, now, one thing, there's a lot of plot holes here that kind of bug me, because Xavier says, "Silence. I detect the presence of another mutant. Clear your minds of all thoughts. There must be no interference as I try to mentally pinpoint the location." Now, I could be wrong. Who knows? But last issue, you remember when the X-Men were battling Magneto, and Xavier's able to talk to them great distances away. I want you to keep that in mind, because I want to point out something that really bugged me while I was reading this. But nonetheless, like the idea of eyes everywhere. And now remember, this is pre-Cerebro. No one has ever heard of Cerebro up to this point. Now, back to my other point. I know I jump. Yeah, I can't help it. It's in my genes. But nonetheless, everyone's fighting to get Jean's attention first. So we see Bobby chasing him, and Beast's like, come back here, you frostbitten flea. She deserves a man, not a refugee from a diaper factory. Now, going back to character development, we see Scott that is kind of becoming more of a recluse. They all want to team up with Jean, as usual. Of all the girls I've ever met, she's the one I give my heart to, but I don't dare, not while I possess my dreaded power. And then, of course, Beast and Bobby. Too bad your speed doesn't match your enthusiasm, Bobby boy. Where'd you come from? And then, of course, it's Jean that talks to Scott and says, come with me, Scott. We'll find the mutant together. And then we see that, again, character development. We see Warren's more the playboy, grabs Jean and says, come with me, Jean. Warren Worthington III, must he be such a show-off? And they take off in his Rolls Royce, and everyone's just kind of like, you conceited clown, I hope you get your pin feathers caught in a ringer. You can tell this is the 60s. But nonetheless, you finally start to see that all these characters finally start to have their own individuality. And I'll get more into Beast in a minute, because you really start to see Hank McCoy here shortly. Now, they're all kind of split up to try to find this mutant. Beast, and there's all like these little red herrings at the beginning where Bobby thinks it's someone with a firepower, but it's someone burning a piece of paper with a magnifying glass. Beast thinks someone's floating, but they're actually putting letters into a display case. And it's not until we get to the circus that we see this caller say, all right, folks, here's our main attraction. What you been waiting for? The one, the only unbelievable marvel of the age. For only a quarter, the fourth part of $1, you can step inside and meet the Blob. You won't believe your eyes when you see the feats the Blob can perform. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Don't push, don't crowd. There's room for all. And so everyone's thinking it's full of crap, that he's just some fat boy. And so this guy says, whoever can take down this guy, $100. And everyone goes for it. And no one can. And then they show how a guy shoots at the beast, the Blob. And he was like, oh, it's just blanks. Wait, look. He really did stop the shells. They couldn't penetrate the skin. So I love this. Simplistic in the art form of Jack Kirby here. Just shows that the Blob cannot be stopped. And just a great way to see how Lee and Kirby and the art team here initially introduced the early X-Men. Why in the beginning they were excellent, but why they needed to change come the latter half of the 70s. Because at this time it could be a little more innocent, but yeah. So anyway, they take him back to the mansion and they test all of the Blob's abilities, and they explain to him that he's a mutant and not just some freak. And he's like, yeah, I'm excellent. I'm the greatest. You can just see the conceitness in his voice. Now, one thing that I do hate is Xavier goes to extend the offer, but I'd like you to join the X-Men. And he goes, no, I don't need you. And this is where I really hate this out-of-pocket moment with Xavier, where he says, this is unheard of. No one has ever refused us before. You cannot be permitted to leave now that you know our identities. It's out of the question. Stop him, my X-Men. I must drive this memory from his mind. Take him to my lab. Jesus. That sounds like more of a Krakoan Xavier instead of the Professor X that we know. Nonetheless, because in the latter halves, you know, they bring people in like, I can never remember her last name, but Stevie, the dance teacher that taught Kitty. She wasn't a mutant, and yet she became the second in command to Magneto during the New Mutant era. So it was just interesting that all of a sudden he's saying, take him, my X-Men, and it's very, very, what do you call it? Magneto of him. So they all try to fight, and I love how Jean just slams the door, and he goes, the door is haunted, it's shut by itself. Now, Beast, here's where we kind of start to see, oh, wait, hold on. I think we need, no. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, it's been a long morning. But listen to how Beast talks here. We're finally starting to see how Hank McCoy really is. He goes, far be it from me to doubt your veracity, big man, but I prefer to learn things for myself. He tries to take the Blob, but it ends up giving him a headache. He's like, satisfied, Monkey Man? Let's just say you proved your point, son. But as Xavier feared, the Blob goes back to the carnival, now that he knows who he is. And he goes, with me as the leader of this carnival, we'll lead the world. And so Xavier's getting ready for an attack. And he starts to build this thing called the, what is it called? Electronic Mass Influencer. Now, I looked online and it doesn't say anything that this is like a proto version of Cerebro, but he says that it enhances his mental powers. Now, going back to my second point, where first issue, Xavier is able to talk to the X-Men from miles away. And then as we saw, he was able to scan for the Blob, just sitting in the training thing. But now he's saying that he needs to build this thing to enhance his powers to wipe the minds of Blob as well as the circus men. So I'm a little confused on what they were thinking, as where Xavier can read the minds over miles away, but has to have a device to wipe memories. But again, they have to build suspense because the circus does literally come to town in Westchester, and the X-Men actually get held. And this makes me laugh because they're thinking putting a bag over Cyclops' head will keep him from being able to blast, but they're saying with a bag over his head and his hands tied, he won't be able to use his visors. Which, again, is another plot point, because if we go back and read when we went over Giant Size X-Men and they talk about Cyclops' powers, they're thinking, well, what happens if Cyclops gets captured? And they show that he had visor releases in his gloves, which they did not think of at this point. So you can kind of see how they were really thinking of ways on the fly to make the X-Men work. But I do like that they at least tried to figure out answers for the fans without attacking them, just saying, hey, yeah, let's think about this. And they would do that. And that's why I'm glad that later down the road they would do those Marvel encyclopedias that would kind of explain powers. But I still think it's BS that they're saying that Cyclops' eye power comes from another dimension, and I don't buy that. Especially here where when we also went over that thing in the latter half of Giant Size X-Men, where it says that he is basically a solar power, just like Havoc. And that will always be headcanon to me, nanny nanny boo-boo. So excellent read. And then it says here that, you know, the Blob may be temporarily defeated, but he will come back. And, of course, he does. And the Blob, for me, has always been one of my favorite villains. Of course, the OG Brotherhood of Evil Mutants with, not Magneto, Raven leading them was always my favorite era during the Claremont days. Now, one thing that I do want to point out that was a little cringy about this issue. Let me see if I can find it. It's where they take off to, I don't know if it's to fight the Blob. Oh, here it is. So they're all getting ready to go search for the Blob. And it says, "Don't worry, sir. Remember how you've trained us. Be careful, my dear. I cannot tell what powers this mutant may possess. He may be a danger." And then this is where everyone starts to fight over who Jean should go with. And Xavier's thinking to himself, "Don't worry, though I couldn't help worrying about the one that I love. But I can never tell her. I have no right, not while I'm the leader of the X-Men and confined to this wheelchair." Murph. Ugh. You know, that for me, I know this, again, this is early stuff, but to me, Xavier seeing his students as his children will always be the way. I mean, I know they brought this back up during Onslaught, but yeah, let's just let that part die. We'll just kind of kick that under the table because that's very cringeworthy. But nonetheless, X-Men number 3, great way to see how the Blob was initially introduced into the X-Men lore. Love how Lee and Kirby and all the art team here did a decent book. And of course, just that OG Jack Kirby penciling and the old traditional coloring. Beautiful. I wish these were original copies, but yeah, these are so expensive. I will eventually have them. I finally have the whole Claremont run, but the early Stan Lee and Roy Thomas ones will be mine eventually. So if you guys have enjoyed what you've seen, if you got the ducats, please first and foremost support your local comic shop and get an original copy. Or if not, you can get it in several different reprints or collected trades like this. If you've enjoyed this review, really would appreciate if you take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Helps the channel more than you could possibly know. And if you won't mind hitting that fancy little X bell next subscribe, that way we can upload content, you guys get notified. Come to the channel. I'd love to talk with you on hearing your thoughts and feedback down in the comments below. Or the socials, which I'll make sure the links down in the description. So with all that said, hope you all continue to have an absolutely amazing day reading, and happy hunting, everyone.